Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for bringing your attention to us here. My name is Justin Reed. I am the manager of transportation solutions here at HireRight, and today we are pleased to be bringing to you the opportunity to speak about a very important subject impacting the transportation industries, and that is recognizing that we are indeed under attack. And this conversation is designed to understand our exposure to what we will define as nuclear verdicts. So before I introduce our guest speaker today and proceed with the conversation, let me give you a few things to think about on the guidelines. First of all, we will be discussing quite a few items here today that you'll likely want to take action on. However, keep in mind that this is not to be construed as direct legal advice. Certainly, HireRight is here to provide this as materials for informational purposes only, and you should consult your own general counsel as you proceed forward. A couple of housekeeping items for you here today. First of all, there is a webinar navigation bar that you will find on your screen. If you do have any problems with the video or the audio advancing according to your expectations, try to refresh the system by pressing F5 on your computer console first. And then also you'll notice red buttons that are available on the screen. They do various different things. What I want to point your attention to is the one that says HireRight Resources. So if you open that up at some point, you'll notice that we have listed some available documentation provided by the Blue Wire team and HireRight for you to take a look at and download for your future utilization. Also, we encourage you to ask questions. The Q&A button is available there. We will be saving time at the end to respond to questions. And if we don't have an opportunity at the end to get to your question, we will be responding via email after the webinar is over. Finally, there is a survey, and I'll remind you of this at the end, but we would greatly appreciate it if you would please give us your impressions of today's webinar. That helps us tremendously as we look forward to future events as well. So today we have a number of opportunities to speak with some experts in the field. So myself, Justin Reed, I wouldn't purport myself to be an expert in the field, and as you will see throughout this presentation, I certainly get to play the role of not the expert in the field. But we're super happy to have with us here today Steve Bryan of Blue Wire. And many of you will know Steve. He's been in our industry for a long time. You'll know him from his time with Vigilo as a founder of that organization. He's certainly worked alongside many of you. He's been with the Samba Safety Group after Vigilo acquired them a number of years ago. But most importantly, when Steve sent me his bio, and I've known Steve now for probably 20 years, right? Okay. So when he sent me his bio, what really stood out to me, though, is he has been married to his wife for 30 years. They've got 5 adult children and 2 grandsons, and he likes to follow the Springsteen road trip, which that's a fun little piece of his life right there. So we're also going to have a guest appearance by Doug Marcello. Doug is the Chief Legal Officer at Blue Wire, and he'll be providing some very interesting content to us in the middle of the presentation here today. So with those elements understood, I want to bring us to the beginning of the conversation. We are here to talk about the issue of nuclear verdicts. So this is our topics for today. The first thing we're going to go over is, what do we even mean by nuclear verdict? What does that, it's been something you've heard. What does it really mean? Have you experienced it? And so forth. From there, we're really going to get into vulnerabilities. So why are you vulnerable to this kind of a situation? Nuclear verdicts, can they happen to you? We're going to show you a little video in the middle here, the real world use case. And the video is not quite tongue-in-cheek because it's designed to show you how things really happen, but I'll be playing the role of the person that's on the defense against a predatory legal situation, and I hope you'll enjoy that. We're going to discuss the strategic plaintiff versus the tactical defendant. And Steve's going to give us some real-world experience of what this actually means. This is very important. This is the meat of the conversation that I really hope you will pay close attention to. And then we're going to look at, how do you actually prepare your defense? What does that mean? How do you defend yourself from the things that we're talking about here today? What kind of solutions are at hand? Okay, so we will start out with nuclear verdicts. Now, as we advance the slide here, you'll notice that there's a rather large number that's going to pop up on the screen. And from that, Steve, this is where we're going to start to talk about. I've got some thoughts here so that maybe you can just introduce this. This is a huge number here that you see in front of us, plus 967%. So would you help us out a little bit by doing two things? Explaining what is a nuclear verdict, and then how does this number pertain to that?
Yeah, great. All right, happy to do that. Three things, though, Justin. I have to update my bio a little bit. It's now 4 grandchildren, 4 grandsons. Our children have been quite busy. I guess I need to update my bio. And just I don't know if you can see this, but my coffee cup here, there's my Springsteen coffee cup. And he has just announced a new world tour starting next spring. So we're very excited. He's been quiet now for the duration of COVID, so we're happy to get back on that bandwagon. But all right, so let's talk a little bit about first the nuclear verdict. I've never loved the term nuclear verdict. Obviously it's a reference to a huge explosive event, one that can wipe out your company, can take you out of business. So the concept is this is a big, scary, explosive event that's very, very dangerous, and nobody wants to see it happen. So there's where the nuclear term arose from. The reason I'm not a huge fan of it is if you talk to just about anybody in the industry knowledgeable about this, they'll say, well, Steve, don't forget about what they would term like death by 1,000 cuts, that it is not just the huge verdicts. I'll talk about this ATRI study here in a minute, and this is talking about those verdicts that are coming in excess of $1 million, that normally would have been much lower than that. But really where we're also seeing a lot of pain is in settlements that might have been a few $1,000s that are now a few $100,000. So they fall under that threshold of nuclear, but they may be the more troubling for the day-to-day operations of most motor carriers. At the end of the day, an actual nuclear verdict is still a pretty rare event. They're growing, as you can see, up 967%. So if I transition to that part of your question, this is, again, ATRI's study. They looked at a period of time between 2010 and 2018, and in that period, year over year, the verdict sizes were increasing over 50% a year. I'd like to get that kind of return on my investment, but the result is over that 8-year period, the average verdict in a trucking-related accident is up 967%. So it's a big, scary number. Now, this was, again, a study that was concluded based on 2018 data. The report by ATRI was published in the summer of 2020. It's available on their website. If you're not a follower of ATRI, I suggest you look them up and download the report. It's free. And it forms a strong part of the foundation of why Blue Wire came into existence. We built a lot of our thinking and the product based on some of the work ATRI did. So that's the 967. You'll see this number presented in lots of places. I think we don't know the number, but what we do know is since 2018, it has done nothing but continue to spike. So we've seen extraordinarily high verdicts. There was a $1 billion verdict in a case in Florida last fall that we probably all saw. And it's almost now become, we're getting numb now to these tens and even hundreds of millions of dollars in verdicts that we're seeing in our industry.
So, the numbers are they're staggering, really, when you look at this. But I guess the question I have is, when you look at an industry like transportation, you have a lot of moving parts there. Are these verdicts, are they representing really a real situation where bad actors in the industry are creating these kinds of problems for themselves? And in essence, this makes sense that there'd be this kind of correction to those who are not representing the best of us in the industry? Or is there something else really at play here, Steve? Is there a bigger issue where the good actors are being assaulted in this way as well?
Yeah, it's very much the latter, Justin. This is I'll call it the success that our trial lawyer opponents are having in this time period is based on a strategy they have developed. We're going to talk about that more in depth in some of these later slides, but it is very much a strategic plan. It's like you hire an architect to build your house. You architect it first, and then you execute on the plan. That is exactly what the trial lawyers have done. They have architected a plan to destroy the reputation of not only our individual motor carriers, but the industry at large. And then based on that very negative perception of the trucking industry, they inflame the juries to respond in a very punitive way. And the only weapon that the jurors have at their disposal is to reach deep into the purse, to come back with these huge financial punitive awards because they believe that the trucking company at question, and perhaps the industry at large, needs to be told to do better. And that's the reptile theory. We'll talk more about that. But it is very much about the industry and tarnishing our reputation and leveraging that in front of jurors that don't know any better. They don't understand this industry, but they do. They are convinced that their safety, their self-preservation, and the safety and self-preservation of their family and friends is at stake, and they alone can cure the problem with these huge punitive awards. That's the basic concept.
Okay, so this is a scenario that can impact anybody that's in the business, and I think that kind of brings us to the next part of the conversation. As we recognize this could hit anyone, and we need to look a little bit at what makes you vulnerable. You provided a really interesting chart here around the issue of vulnerabilities. So as I go into that, unpack these a little bit for me. Help me understand, what are we really looking at here with these numbers and these concepts?
Yeah. So this is a chart also that comes straight from the ATRI study, that same one that showed us the 967% increase. This is a table that they created that is showing issues. Think of these issues brought: hours of service, driver history, controlled substances, etc. When these issues are present in a case, then you look over at the next column. 100% of the time, 91.7% of the time, 87.5% of the time, when these issues are present, it is a favorable outcome for the plaintiffs. So these are what we call attack vectors. These are those things the trial lawyers are looking for in the case, and if they find them, largely they're going to win. They become very, very difficult to defend against these, and the story they'll be telling is that these, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, represent systemic failures of this motor carrier to attend to these most basic of compliance needs, of safety, of focus on safety and safety culture. And now, surely, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you can see just how badly they need to be punished. So just real quick, I won't explain. We'll peel back a few of them as an example. So hours of service, most of us are not on paper logs anymore, but in the past, those were a huge deal. ELDs did not make that go away. The issue is still there. We're seeing carriers that are using things like personal conveyance and unassigned time as basically cheats to the hours of service rules. And guess what? The trial lawyers know that, so they know where to look. When they find those issues, that's a systemic failure of the motor carrier. Driver history is measured in things like DQ files, driver training, those types of things. Any time that you see a drug and alcohol violation against a driver, if that can be painted as a systemic disregard for those things, that's really, as you can imagine, going to inflame a jury who thinks that the motor carrier is letting their drivers operate in a manner that's impaired. So they don't like that. Any health-related issues is measured by things like expired med cards, those kinds of things. That's the data that the trial lawyers are looking for. If they find a pattern of med cards, MVRs, those kinds of things that need to be attended to on a regular basis, they're going to use that to inflame the jury. And then things more, mundane, I guess, more mundane, like use of cell phone against company policy, texting while driving, those types of things. And a big category, and this is where, our partnership with HireRight is so important in this, is the hiring practices. They lump all this stuff together. The trial lawyers have become brilliant at looking at the hiring practices of motor carriers, starting all the way back at the post on the job board. They put the want ad up. What does it say? What is the text of that? Is it even, it's amazing, we look at a lot of these and we find that some motor carriers, we understand how difficult it is to hire drivers, but language like, that indicates that perhaps, I've actually seen some that brag about the fact that they don't have any kind of speed limiters in their trucks. Well, what does that say? Right from the moment that you're hiring a driver, there's this language that can hurt you even before you've got the first job application in. And then, of course, through all your background checks and your pre-employment screenings and all those pulling MDRs, all those things that are normal best practices and even in some cases required by the regulations. And we don't always do a great job of them in that hiring process. That is fruitful ground for these trial lawyers to find these systemic failures. And you can see when they find them, they're going to win. They're going to beat us. These things exist. So this I think was one of the more important pieces that came out of the ATRI work, was the specifics as to what issues are best used, most effectively used against us in these depositions and trials.
Yeah, one of the things that stands out to me in this list is the one that says left the scene of the crash. And I know that you and I have spoken about this before. When you look at that, just kind of face value, the concept of leaving the scene of the crash, we all think about, this truck plowed into somebody and then took off. Okay, yeah. I mean, I think we could all agree if that truly happens, well, that's going to be a situation that would warrant some investigation.
Right.
But unpack that a little bit for me as well, because leaving the scene of the crash isn't as defined as what I just said, is it?
Yeah, no, it can be a lot of things, and it's what the officer writes down, right? When the responding officer responds to the accident, there's a lot of sloppiness in the way crashes are reported, and we've seen this going all the way back, years. And it's largely a reason that the whole crash preventability program was put into place, because there's a lot of ambiguity and misunderstanding and misstatement in these crash reports. So that's another area where, create a scenario. The motor carriers in depositions, as such as we're going to see with you in just a minute, which is an excellent video, by the way. And they're being quizzed on what you did when this driver left the scene of a crash. What is your company policy on that? What did you do with that driver? Do you have other drivers that have behaved in a similar manner? The way I like to talk about this, no nuclear verdict ever arose from the facts of a crash. The trial lawyers are not looking at this crash. They're not looking at this driver or their behavior in this case. They are using it to open the door on your company and look for these systemic failures that may or may not have anything to do with the accident. We've seen very, very large nuclear verdicts against very well-known prominent motor carriers in our industry that may have hours of service as the basis of the case. It had nothing to do with hours of service. It wasn't an issue in that crash. But that's what they're brilliant at. That's what they've gotten very good at. It's almost irrelevant what the facts of this crash were. It's just a marker. It's a pin in the board where the trial lawyers now have an opportunity to go open that thing up, peel the onion back, and see if they can find any of these other issues at your company. So that's the vulnerabilities that we are talking about, that we believe is so important to the Blue Wire approach. You've got to understand your vulnerabilities. Be proactive. Doug, my partner, likes to talk about this. It's like predicting hurricanes, right? If you live in a hurricane zone, you live on the east coast of Florida, a hurricane's going to hit. It's not that important that you know the day and time it's going to hit. You just know you live in a high-risk zone, so you have to take measures to protect yourself against hurricanes. And you can't do that when it comes over the horizon. It's too late, or worse, after it happens. So I like that analogy. That's what we're trying to get people to focus on, is being proactive about being in an environment where hurricanes are going to hit. Crashes happen, big verdicts happen. You have to prepare yourself ahead of time. If you're reacting to these, you've already lost. It's already too late.
Well, let's look at a reactive situation. So as I promised earlier, we're going to have a short video. It's about a 5-minute video, so I encourage everybody to stay attention to what we're talking about here. This is just a mock situation I'm about to show you. And it's going to star Doug Marcello, the Chief General Counsel over with Blue Wire, who is putting on kind of the black hat, if you will, in this scenario and attacking myself, who stands in for the sort of hassled and harried safety director who has been put into a position of deposition over something that's happened to that organization. So I'm going to click forward to the next slide, give it a few seconds, the video will start. Once the video is concluded, Steve and I will be back, and we're going to kick into the meat of the conversation about how you as an organization are acting in a tactical position, and your opponents, if you will, on the plaintiff sides are very strategic, and how we're going to change that. So here we go. Let's see if this goes for us.
Sir, would you agree that safety is the most important focus of a trucking company?
Sure, yeah, that sounds right.
And would you agree that your company should make every effort to ensure that it is safe as possible? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I guess so.
And would you agree with the saying in trucking that you hire your accidents? You've heard that. Would you agree with it?
Well, look, bad drivers can cause accidents. That's true.
Yeah. And would you agree that you should take every precaution to ensure that the driver you put behind the wheel of that 80,000-pound behemoth of a truck is qualified and has a history of safety?
Look, we want to hire the safest drivers that we can. But let's be honest, the driver shortage out there creates a lot of struggle for them.
Sir, do you agree that you should hire qualified drivers with a history of safety? Yes or no?
Sure, yes.
What do you do to determine who this driver's past employers were? Do you do anything?
Well, look, he filled out the job application and he listed them on there.
All right, anything else?
Like what?
Well, did you run a pre-employment screening program report, a PSP report? Did you do that?
No.
Well, why not?
Well, come on. I mean, look, that's an expensive report. It takes time to run those kinds of things. We've got a very tight process here of moving things along.
Well, were you aware that your driver had driven for Nowhere Trucking? You ever aware of that?
Well, it was on the application.
Take a look. You saw the application. Did you see it there?
I do not.
Well, you would agree with me, wouldn't you, that if you had run a PSP report, you would have known that he drove for Nowhere Trucking. You would have known about that employer, right?
Well, I mean, not if he didn't have a roadside inspection while he was there.
Sir, in discovery, we received the PSP that was run by the company to which he applied after this accident. And they didn't hire him, by the way. You would have known about his work at Nowhere Trucking just like they did. And that he had multiple hours of service violations just like he did in the accident while he's driving with you if you had run that PSP. Isn't that true?
I guess.
Well, okay, let's shift gears. Let's talk about his medical qualifications. Did you have him take a DOT physical upon hiring?
No, I mean, he had a valid med card when he came on with us, and certainly no need to spend more time and money and effort when we didn't need to.
All right. Can you tell the jury what did you do, if anything, to ensure that he remained medically qualified once he came on board?
you know, this is a professional driver. This is part of the process that he is responsible to do to remain a qualified professional driver. He's got to be responsible for that med card. That's certainly that's his thing.
Sir, did you do anything to ensure that the driver was continuously medically qualified when he operated a 40-ton truck for your profit? Did you ever do anything?
Like I said, he's a professional driver, and we expect him to take care of those things and remain qualified.
Well, and in fact, sir, you'd agree with me that he didn't. And as a result, your driver was not medically qualified at the time of the accident because his DOT med card had expired. And you were not monitoring it to ensure compliance. Isn't that true?
It's my understanding that's something that the safety department handle later on. You know, certainly in the front end, he's a grown professional driver.
Yeah, did he, well, you say he's a professional driver. Did he even have a CDL at the time of this accident?
Well, yes. I mean, when we hired him 11 months before the accident, we ran the MVR like we're supposed to, and he did have a CDL that was valid at the time. Yes, sir.
Okay, that was 11 months before the accident. Did you ever run an MVR between the time you hired him and the time of this accident?
Oh, come on. I mean, MVRs are time-consuming and they're expensive to run those. We didn't have any mandate to do that. It had not been a year with the requirements of the regulation to run that. So we were fully within the compliance components of the regulation to still be trusting that MVR from 11 months prior.
Yeah, but, you know, isn't it true that if you had run that MVR, you would have known that his CDL was downgraded because he failed to update his med card status with the DOT? You would have known that had you taken the time and spent a few dollars to run an MVR. Isn't that true?
I guess technically.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have. I need to take a shower after that one.
Okay, well, that was me at my best, being confused and annoyed at the same time, which is, you know, something I apparently am fairly good at, Steve. So there you go. But
well, yeah,
the point being made is it's pretty. The tactic is attack on all fronts, confuse, and a fluster. And you create an opportunity for people to feel that you are not competent to be answering the questions. So with that, I'm going to turn the navigation over to you, and let's hear where you want to go after that disaster that we just showed.
Okay. Well, I thought it was very well done. But yeah, as Doug said right at the end, you know, that is not his normal personality. We don't see that Doug on a day-to-day basis at Blue Wire. So that's just not the Doug we know and love. But I think what you saw there was his use of that same table of ATRI issues. You could see him weaving his way through those issues, right? Looking for things like hiring practices and background checks and PSPs and hours of service violations and whether or not he has a CDL. Those are all the things that we talked about in that chart a minute ago. And then on top of that, the second part of that strategy is to do what he illustrated there, which is to victimize the person in the deposition, to turn you into a person who looks defensive and secretive, and to the extent that they can couple those two things together, victimize the witness, make them look like they're hiding something, and then get right into a few of these specific examples that we talked about. And they've gone a long ways down the road now of putting you way back on the defensive in a place that's very difficult to recover from. So we move forward. Okay, Steve, how do we do a better job of this? So this quote that you see on the screen, "Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat." This comes from a book called The Art of War. This is an almost 500-year-old book written by a Chinese general who actually was trying to propose a world without wars. And he was trying to figure out how can we avoid wars. And in doing so, he wrote this book. I would encourage people to read it. You can get it on Amazon for about $9. It's a short read. But this is one of my favorite quotes, and I think most on topic for what we're talking about today. And I'm going to talk about the tactics that we use in this industry, which I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we are brilliant at it as an industry. And I'll talk about that. What we lack is the strategy. And they have a very strong strategy called the reptile theory. So we're going to get into that. But I think understanding, and again, I'll go back to my example, having an architect do your plan for your building is the strategy. Building it, having your contractor and subcontractors build the house, is the tactics. That's the doing versus the planning. If you skip the planning steps, you can imagine what your house is going to turn out like. It's probably not going to be what you envision. You have to have that strategic step. And that is what we are, as an industry, are lacking. And that's what Blue Wire is trying to bring to the table here with our focus on this. So I'm going to start with this. This is the strategic plaintiff is company focused. They are focused on you, the motor carrier. They are not focused on the you saw that in what Doug just did. He's not really talking about the driver. He was attacking you, Justin, and your company that you represent. So that's their strategy. It is repeatable. They can do it over and over and over. They train themselves on it. There's conferences. There's organizations that you can join as a trial lawyer and learn how to do this. You learn these techniques. They teach them to you. You go to a workshop and work in Las Vegas over a 2 or 3 day period. You pay them $1,000 and you come out as a certified truck accident attorney. So there are really focused ways they do this, and they are all learning this strategy. They held their most recent workshop and they had 60 trial lawyers that signed up for it over a few day period, and they came out certified. We have 60 more trial lawyers coming after us than we did a month ago. And that repeats over and over and over. That's the strategy. Let me navigate on here. All right. It is, so the reptile theory, I want to talk about the reptile theory a little bit. We've perhaps all heard of it. We've heard it talked about. It's a real thing. It is a written book, 2009, The Manual of the Plaintiff's Revolution, called The Reptile. Now, this one you can also get on Amazon, but unlike The Art of War, this is not $9.95. This is $1,600 on Amazon for a copy of this book. And I tell people, while that sounds crazy, you might want to consider buying a copy for your company and passing it around. I ask people, if you were a college football coach and your opponent published their game plan on a website the day before the game, wouldn't you read it? Wouldn't you want to know what the opposing coach is proposing to do that on the next game? We have to read this. We have to understand it as an industry. And again, this is really part of the foundation of what Blue Wire is trying to do. It is a systemic disregard for safety, all the things we just saw Doug attempt to do. And at the end of the day, we talk a lot about the company reputation. I can summarize the reptile book for you. I still encourage you to read it. But if I were to summarize it, it's 2 steps. 1, destroy the reputation of this company at question. Destroy them and use the techniques you just saw. Step 2, take their money. This is a very simple step. The book itself will tell you that if you cannot find these systemic failures, the reptile does not awaken. You will not get the jury enraged and looking for revenge. People understand an accident. They will not punish you for what is an accident. They will punish you if the opponent is showing that it's a systemic disregard for safety. So that's the reptile theory in a nutshell. It comes from the quasi-brain science of that, back when we all came out of the primordial ooze as reptiles and began to walk on the land millions of years ago, we had this reptilian part of our brain that only cared about self-preservation and safety. It also cares about reproduction, but Justin, that'll have to be a different session. We'll have to vet the audience for that one. So, but think about the reptile theory as it applies to these crashes. It's all about emotion and revenge and fear and punishment. That's what the reptile brain theory tells us. So that's what they appeal to. So, you've seen that already demonstrated here in the video. Financial extremism. This is an area we all need to be paying attention to. This is a part of what I would call social inflation. We all have become numb as a society to huge numbers. We see it in everything from government spending to sports salaries to entertainers. My own hero here, Bruce Springsteen, earlier this year sold the rights to his entire lifelong collection. I believe it was to Sony for $500 million. Now, good for you, Bruce. But we see these numbers, we hear these numbers in all aspects of our lives. Look at government spending these days. We just glaze over. And you can see there's mock juries and, in fact, recordings of actual jury deliberations where you see them sitting around a table and somebody will propose, well, I think this is a $10 million. This isn't the $5 million they're asking for. This is a $10 million case. And then somebody else will say, well, why 10? Why not 100? You're right. Okay, 200 then. And they can escalate like that because we just don't have the awareness of what that does to a company to hit them with these huge. They don't have insurance at those levels. Most motor carriers don't have the ability to withstand something like a multi-$100 million verdict. So that social inflation, financial extremism, they're not afraid. They're not afraid to ask for $1 billion. Why not? Nobody's offended by that. The jury don't react to that because they hear these numbers in their everyday lives. So that social inflation is a big challenge for us. And again, the response is don't awaken the reptile. Don't give them that conversation in the beginning by making sure you don't have these vulnerabilities, these exposure points that they can exploit. And the plaintiff is owed. Look at this poor injured plaintiff. Look what he's lost. Look what the family member has lost to them. There's been an arm or a leg lost, or there's been bone damage, spinal column damage, brain injuries. You see all these things also listed in the ATRI report. When you see certain types of injuries, brain injuries, injuries to children, things like that, the awards go through the roof. So they're looking at specific fact patterns in the case tied to these systemic failures of the company that drives these huge things. And they're not working alone. This is another thing that we all need to be aware of. This is not just one trial lawyer coming off of the billboard and standing in court and banging the table and being successful. They're really smart about this. They pull together a whole group of allies in this. They have experts, medical experts, psychologists. We've even seen optometrists and all kinds of different specialties that they will bring to bear. People the jury looks to with respect. This is a doctor. This is a scientist. This is a person that really, a physicist. And the jury looks to these people with respect and hears about all these things that are happening. Well, guess who gets paid as a part of the verdict? The team, the rest of the broader team that the plaintiff assembles is all paid very handsomely for this testimony that they're giving.
So then, from a strategic perspective, right, they've gathered together this force that is coming from all these various different aspects and engaging in this conversation from essentially fronts that you would never have expected them to come from, right, in a logical conversation about an accident, right?
That's right. That's exactly right, Justin. We see one of the areas they've gotten really good at, and I think a lot of motor carriers will understand this. If you've been a subject, it doesn't have to have been a nuclear claim, but just a normal run-of-the-mill claim, what we see happen is the accident happens, and then there's this dark period. And in this dark period, which could be a year, could be 2 years, depending on the statute of limitations, the trial lawyers are going out and working up the expenses. They're getting medical diagnosis done. They're aligning their allies in this, and they're coming back so that when they pop out at the last minute with the actual lawsuit, right before the statute of limitation runs out, the motor carrier is sitting there going, we didn't know any of this. We had no visibility into the fact this plaintiff has already run up $300,000 in medical expenses. And we never had the ability to weigh in because we didn't know. It's dark. That's a big problem. We've got Doug actually has some really good ideas, I think, for defense attorneys to be more proactive there. But knowing when the incident happens and knowing how to go cast light into this dark period is really important. So that you're not just suddenly surprised because it's too late. Now you're totally responsive again. We can't be responsive. We got to be proactive.
So when you talk about suddenly surprised, that kind of brings up very nicely this tactical perspective where, we're sitting here doing our thing, the thing we always do, right? And this is our little piece, our little world. And we handled that accident just fine according to our little piece, right? But now there's this all-out assault against all these other elements here. Talk to us a little bit about this tactical defendant. I think the graphic here is perfect because it represents how so many of us have, basically our work life is like, whoo, everything, right? So help us understand that.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, think about, I've never done the job myself, sat in the seat of a safety director at a trucking company, but I've sure been around a lot of them in the last couple of decades. And I have to tell you, we are absolutely excellent at doing this work, this tactical work. Man, we can keep these balls in the air with CSA, with MBRs, verification of employment, all those things, now drug and alcohol screens, the things we must do just to be in basic compliance with the regulations. And we're good at it. We've got a whole industry of people who are certified in this. They spend hours and hours training, putting systems in place, but it is all tactical. And that's the problem is all you've got to do is for just a minute, drop a ball. And that's the opening for the systemic failure argument. And nobody's perfect. You're never going to be perfect. So you have to keep doing all these things. All this has to be done. But accompanying this, we are distracted because we're doing this work. I think of it as I almost think we need a new role in the industry, right? That is something like the director of strategic safety. We almost need a focus on the strategy level, just like we needed both an architect and a contractor. We are fantastic contractors. We are doing such a good job. We lack the strategic focus. So we get distracted, we get reactive. One of the things Atri calls out in this study, which is really worth reading again, is this concept of pathos versus logos. It's Greek terminology that just means emotion versus logic. And the reptile theory is based on emotion. It is an emotional argument. It wins over logic 100% of the time. You cannot fight back against an emotional argument with logic. And we see this in case after case where the argument may be something about, a systemic failure. And our answer is, I've got an expert here that's going to talk to you about the science of braking distance to show that in this case, this driver actually wasn't going as fast as you say he was. It's irrelevant. The jury's not listening to that. They're still hung up on the fact that they've been told you're a terrible, unsafe operator. So your very logical, very correct answer to this is completely ineffective, as Atri points out. And then the two, we really have to get over this. We are defensive and secretive. We won't talk about our successes and failures. We just don't do it. There is no venue to do that. The trial lawyers get together at their conferences. They have workshops. They teach each other how to do a better job of suing us. But we do not have an equivalent place to go and say, look, here's what I did. This worked. This didn't work. And there is a secretiveness, if that's a word, where we just don't want to talk about it. We want to keep it quiet and secret, and we're just not going to talk about what might be a little bit embarrassing. They found this problem with us. We just don't do it, and it's hurting us badly. So we've got to make the transition from being the tactical defendant to being a strategic, proactive defendant in these cases. So that's really what the essence of the Blue Wire platform is to help you leverage off this amazing stuff you're doing tactically, but you've got to introduce the strategic part, the planning. All right, questions there, Justin? I'll move on. So you have to focus on what happens before the crash. That's the proactive part. You're not going to wait until the incident to react to it. We have to change the way we're thinking, and we have to start looking at our vulnerabilities now, ahead of this. Look, the crashes are an inevitable thing. I think I've seen numbers where groups like ATA will tell us that something like 80% of the motor vehicle crashes that happen are actually caused by the other driver, by the car driver, the motorcyclist, what have you. So you can't ever know everything that you're going to have to know about the crash because you're not in control something like 80% of the time. They're going to happen to you, whether it's your fault or not. But every single one of those is those opportunities for these highly trained, highly skilled, reptile-loving trial lawyers to come in and attack you, as we've described. So you can't wait. Don't wait for discovery. Don't believe that you can hide data in discovery. If you look secretive, the jury sees that. They see the depositions such as you did, Justin, and they see a person that looks secretive and unsure and unconfident, and that is not a good place you want to be. So how do we get there? Practices, policies, procedures, programs, the technology you use, you have to pull all this together in a strategy, and you are doing it. You have a lot of this stuff in place. You have corporate safety policies. How closely are you following them every single time? You can't go to a session on safety policies in this industry at any of the events and not hear horror stories about policy manuals that are well drafted, well written, well intentioned, and not followed. And that is a huge problem. So we have to, as an industry, and there's lots of thought on this. Some people think there's an extreme kind of school of thought. We shouldn't have safety policies at all written. I've seen, I can't remember what they call it. There's like a list of like 6 or 7 items that some really experienced defense attorneys are saying. It's almost like a poster, like an employment poster on the wall. This is our safety checklist. This is what we care about. But it's less prone to attack if it's written down in a 200 or 300 page policy document. That's really hard to follow. So again, I'm not giving legal advice as you described. You have to work with your own legal counsel, but pay attention to your policy manuals. And if you have them, you have to follow them. You have no choice. Otherwise, you're hurting yourself. So, and then proactively monitor these attack vectors, these areas that we talked about coming out right out of that issues table out of ATRI. You have to have a platform in place where you are watching that. This is the perfect place for software to live, is monitoring and reporting on an ongoing basis when it sees an issue in what ends up being huge volumes of data. There's a lot of data out there. You can't look at it every day. That's just not something you can do. You need to have a system that's going to pull these things out and notify you when something gets a little bit off the rails so that you can be proactive and close that up before it becomes a big problem. So when we talk about the Blue Wire solution, we have really 2 main categories. We're going to, first of all, monitor a lot of data. We're looking for about 250 different data points that run from things that come out of the FMCSA, DOT, crashes, inspections, violations, all those things that are collected about us in audits and compliance reviews, at roadside inspections, those types of things. So we mine a lot of that data looking for some of those data elements. And then we mine your own platforms. We're looking into your ELD platforms, your camera platforms, your DQ file systems, those types of things, driver training. And we're looking for evidence that there are vulnerabilities. So those are happening. In addition to that, we have built what we call a Beyond Compliance program. There are many, there's been a lot of discussion about beyond compliance in the industry over the last, decade and a half or so. The concept being that this actually came from Congress, who mandated back in 2015 in what was called the FAST Act. It was a piece of legislation actually designed mostly for infrastructure repair. But in that, they embedded a requirement that the FMCSA must go develop a Beyond Compliance program. And the concept of Beyond Compliance is to give credit to a motor carrier for doing those things that they're not required to do. Evidence of safety culture that goes far beyond just checking the basic boxes. We're putting cameras in. We're spending more money than we need to on everything from disc brakes, automatic transmissions, lane departure systems, forward-looking radar, side-looking cameras, all the things that are available that this industry, according to ATA, now invests $10 billion a year into safety technology. What the beyond compliance concept does is gives you, a motor carrier, credit for that. And credit in the form of recognition. It becomes a part of your company narrative that is there to counter this incredibly negative narrative that we're getting from the trial lawyers. So
it sounds like a standard of care, right? Right, Steve? It's really a standard of care in many different aspects that says we're leveraging what's available to be at its peak performance, as opposed to being reactive to a situation.
Yeah, and it's really setting a standard of care for yourself that it shows that you're operating well beyond a minimum standard of care. That's the safety culture of my company. And that flipping the script during the depositions, go back to what, if you had something like that, you flip that on Doug, that's the moment in time, whether it's in the depositions or even at the trial itself, where we have this kind of thought experiment where the trial lawyer has attacked you, and now it's your turn to talk, and you say, well, that was very interesting, counselor. Let me tell you about the company I work for. And then you lay out this narrative, get into beyond compliance, all the money you're spending and investing. And that is a very powerful, a story is a thing that is uniquely powerful for humans. We respond to stories. And up to this point, we have let the trial lawyers own our story, and we have to take that back. I'm kind of cognizant.
I think, well, I was going to say that whole thing with the video that Doug and I did, really the concept being that when we looked at tactical situation of most people in their daily job, like, okay, I've got a deposition, I've got to do this at 1 o'clock, and then at 2 o'clock I've got this other thing, and it's just another thing, and I got to get that done.
Yeah. And
the ambush occurs, and you're not prepared for that, and so forth. And so I know that Doug certainly has a great narrative that he likes to go on about how to prepare for those sort of things. And I think you're kind of closing here on this next slide. Actually, we've got a great question here that's just come in, and I think it's a great segue. So I'm just going to bring it up right now. It says, my company runs upward of 200 trucks. How can we share information or learn from other motor carriers in similar situations?
Yeah. Wow. That's almost like I planted that question.
Did you plant that question? No, you didn't.
No, I did not plant that question. So what I'm showing here, and I'm cognizant of the time here. I know we want to wrap this up and give more Q&A opportunity here, but what you see now here on the screen is just a couple of screenshots. So we have, think of it as almost two different products that we have. So on the left side, the community in defense of the industry. This is a platform we call Blue Wire Connect. Think of it as a LinkedIn, but private, members only, free, and dedicated to those conversations. So the question is, how do I share these best practices? Go to the Blue Wire website, apply for membership at Blue Wire Connect, and come on in and join the conversation. We hold multiple roundtables and sessions and discussion groups in Blue Wire Connect every single month. People post articles, they make statements, they ask questions, or just observe. You don't have to enter anything. Just read what other people are saying. It's a active and growing community. I think we're close to about 300 members in there now. Again, totally free, no obligation. We're not going to market to you. Just come on in, fill out your form. We vet you. We make sure that you are either a person at a motor carrier, safety, risk, compliance, executive, what have you, or you are working in the insurance industry in defense of trucking, or you are a defense lawyer. Those are the three categories of people that we allow to be members of Connect. So we're super excited about that. And everybody who's listening, please consider joining that discussion. Again, totally free. The second part, what you see on the right side of the screen, that's our paid service. That's our subscription. It works as a software as a service. So it's a ongoing monthly fee you pay us. It's based on the size of your company, based on power unit count. So it's just it's a it works out to about 0.5% of your policy cost on your truck is what you're paying for the Blue Wire service. Most companies, it works out to about $5 per power unit per month. So that's your basic idea of the cost. What you get is access to this brand new platform. Nothing like this exists, where we measure your exposure to the reptile theory, as evidenced by this graphic you see here, 0 to 100 scale. If you get 100, you are very well protected. You have no vulnerabilities. We have yet to see 100 on anybody. And then we break that down by these different attack vectors that line up perfectly with those ATRI issues that we talked about. And then the second half of the service, if you will, is this Beyond Compliance program. We are letting you document and take credit for those things you are doing that go beyond the regulatory requirements. And we capture that for you. Those two things then come together into this idea of a narrative. We are literally using software to pull data out of our system and storyboard it for you. We are giving you an outline of the story that you will write about your company, or that we can deploy a professional journalist that we have on staff who can help you write that feature story about your company. It's such a powerful outcome of this to be able to walk into a deposition such as you had, Justin, and say, let me tell you about the company I work for. So we also, the fourth component, we have a recommendation engine in here. It basically, like other recommendation engines that are common in software, you know, you buy a movie on Netflix, it'll tell you which one you might want to watch next. You buy something on Amazon, they'll tell you what other products you might like, etc. Our recommendation engine looks at this data, both in the Reptile Theory Index and in Beyond Compliance, and makes recommendations to our allies, HireRight and Ally. We're going to find vulnerabilities, and when we have an ally that can help remedy those, we send the customer in to you to inquire as to how they can close those vulnerabilities. The model I like to use, we are like the physician. We're diagnosing the patient, finding areas for improvement, and then sending them to the specialists like HireRight for the improvement they need to make to close those gaps. We now have almost 60 different companies that have joined what we call the White Hat Movement, the Blue Wire Army of Allies, and they run the gamut from ELD providers to DQ file systems to HireRight, all the work you do on hiring and pre-hire, and you know, driver training, CSA, MVRs. I mean, the list goes on and on. Again, all those things we see in the ATRI issues list. Where can we find partners that can help cure those things? So that's the basic Blue Wire service. We look for vulnerabilities, we give credit for Beyond Compliance, we make recommendations, and we help you draft your narrative. And we give you a place to come and talk about all this and connect.
Well, Steve, I have to say, with everything that you've given us here today to consider, moving from the tactical position into a strategic element within our organization isn't something that just happens with thinking about it, right? You're going to have to take action. When I look at HireRight, you know, I've worked for HireRight for 20 years, and I've seen everything that we used to do 20 years ago evolve to far more complexity than it has today. But we are part of that strategic position, but we're not the only thing, right? I mean, our customers use HireRight so that we can do things that they need done effectively and efficiently. And this goes beyond just that kind of thing. You're talking about a platform here that can really do a lot of good for the conversation and helping our industry. I will tell you, I am deeply concerned about the subject. I'm very grateful that you've come on here today. I believe that you're doing work to protect not just individual carriers, but the complete integrity of our transportation industry in the United States. And I would encourage anyone who's listened here today to take this as an opportunity to move in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, I would just emphasize too, Justin, I think there's lots of ways to get involved. Blue Wire is one of them, but work with your state associations, your national associations, get involved, be involved, pay attention. We need this so desperately right now. This is not a problem that any one company can make go away. This is an industry movement, and it's the only way we will get back to, I kind of think of getting back to pre-2009 with the publication of the Reptile. We can go back to a point where nuclear verdicts is no longer a part of our vocabulary, I believe.
Well, thank you, Steve, for joining us here today, and I appreciate everybody's attention. Please do remember there's a survey at the conclusion of the session here today. And if we didn't get to your question, we'll be getting to it later on. Thanks to everybody at Blue Wire who made this possible here today, and our team here at HireRight, our great help from Sharon, who put all this together. And may you all have a great afternoon.
All right.
Appreciate your
Thanks,
time.
Jeff. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.